BCG acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present.
Most excited that, probably for the wrong reasons, that's lasers, because they are awesome to use. There's just so much energy just gets blasted into these weed plants in such an intense short period of time. It's quite satisfying to burn these weeds to a crisp with a big laser.
Hello and welcome back to Shared Ag Solutions by BCG. I'm Janine Batters, and in this episode, sponsored by GE Silos, we're going to be talking with Dr Michael Walsh about some of the alternative weed technologies that hopefully we might be able to use on our farm soon. So welcome, Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Janine. Nice to be talking to you.
So really excited to have you on. This is the 5th episode of our series on Horizon Farm Tech. Can you tell our listeners just quickly, well, it probably won't be just quickly with you, Michael, because you do have quite extensive background in weed research, but can you tell our listeners a bit about you and your background in weed research?
I guess I started off working quite a lot on herbicides and herbicide resistance. That was primarily with Australian Herbicide Resistance Initiative at the University of Western Australia. Then sort of realising how much of a problem herbicide resistance is and will always be, started playing around with alternative weed control technologies. The one that I've spent most of my research career on was harvest weed seed control, and subsequent to that I've started getting into the bit more weird and wonderful areas of trying to target weeds and weed seeds.
So can you tell me a little bit about some of these weird and wonderful, because I was thinking this episode was going to be on microwave zapping technologies, but when I asked you to send me a bit of information through, I was just blown away by all the research that you're working on. So I thought, for a start, can you just talk to me about some of the zapping technology that's not all microwave, how those work and how they differ from each other?
They're different, but they're all the same in many ways. Depending on what you're calling zapping weed technology, I'll assume you're referring to electrical weeding and lasers. So electrical weeding traditionally has been about delivering high voltages, 5 kilovolts or more, to weed plants that then results in essentially cooking from the inside out of those weed plants. So the charge is delivered to the weed leaf, the charge travels through the plant into the soil and back to the negative probe. And as that charge passes through the plant, it creates resistance, or there's resistance in the plant to the movement of that charge, and that results in heat. So the idea is that you need to get that electrical charge going from the positive probe that touches the weed plant through to the negative probe, which is typically a disc being dragged in the soil near where the plant's being targeted. So laser weeding. So lasers are essentially a high-intensity beam of light, and again, they act by cooking the target, the plant target. So you concentrate that beam of light energy onto the plant. Typically, you try and target the growing point of the plant, and you cook that growing point. So again, it's a thermal type weed control.
So is that different to microwaving them?
Yeah, so it is a bit different. Well, similar but different. So microwaving, again, is a cooking type weed control. So as a microwave oven works, it heats by the energy being absorbed by water that gets hot, and that generated heat cooks food, or in this case, it cooks the weeds or the weed seeds in the soil.
So how does that work?
So again, you're focusing the microwave energy. The earlier versions were just typical microwave on its side, like a household microwave on its side. You had a focus horn coming out the side of the microwave into an area that was probably 20 centimetres squared, and then you would hold that horn over the plant or the soil for a period of time, enough to cook the water or heat the water inside the plant to a sufficient extent that it would cause cell disruption.
And how safe is that?
I guess they're all safe and unsafe depending on how much you expose yourself to them. It can be really safe as long as you've got appropriate shielding and you're not putting your hands or feet or anything underneath what you focus on, whether it's electrical weeding, laser weeding, or microwaves. They can be made really safe, but there's an element of risk, as there is with any weed control technology.
You said there's different things you can do to be safe. Is it the same for each of the zapping technologies, or are they different depending on what technology you're using?
It will be different for different technologies. So electrical weeding there is a current. You need to make sure that that current goes where you want it to go and that it doesn't get deflected off a piece of equipment and back through whatever. For lasers, it's a high intensity light beam, which can be dangerous to your eyes if it's reflected off of something like the soil surface or whatever. So yeah, they're all different.
Which one's best, Michael?
We've eliminated microwave weeding for agricultural purposes for large scale production systems because it's very slow and energy intensive. Electrical weeding is probably a little bit more wasteful in terms of the amount of energy used. But again, it depends on the operational system that you're using. The traditional electrical weeding systems use quite high power to kill weeds, but there are new systems coming through that use a pulsed, lower powered system. Lasers can be highly efficient, but the challenge with them is that you have to get that focal point on the plant. You have to get the growing point of the plant. So that's the big challenge to operational efficiency, and you have to expend some energy in making sure that you do get that targeting right. So,
okay, and talking about power, how much power do they use, the electrical heating systems?
the newer systems, the low energy ones, can use as little as 15, 20 joules.
And are they available now? Are people using them now?
They're still in development stage. They're still being tested for their efficacy and still being developed for practical application purposes in field scale systems. Laser systems have been developed for commercial use in horticulture. So Carbon Robotics having an autonomous platform that is using laser weeding and lettuces and carrots and things like that.
So can you paint a picture for me, Michael? Because I'm imagining these little zappers are on the back of the arm of the boom and they're just zapping away, similar to a camera sprayer. Is that how you see them working?
Potentially they could work that way. The barriers to that they typically need to work slower, like they need to be applied at a slower speed. And the reason why you need to apply a laser at a slower speed is, first of all, if you want to use a cheaper, low energy laser, you need to focus it on the target for a few seconds rather than a fraction of a second. The other reason is that to actually find that weed target, and specifically the growing point of that weed target, takes a bit longer. So you need a really accurate weed recognition system, and that high accuracy requires a slower speed. You can't actually, with high level accuracy, recognise the growing point of a ryegrass plant at 20 kilometres an hour, at the moment anyway.
There's a lot more involved, isn't there? I was thinking sort of like cartoon and like zap, zap, zap. But obviously you've got to think about so many different things. So how would you apply it then? So if you're thinking about speed, it's got to be quite slow to get to the weed, but also zap it at the right spot.
What they're actually going to look like in the field, I think in the first instance, in Australia, in Australian landscapes, in large-scale cropping systems, they probably will be as a slow-moving autonomous vehicle. And that's in the assumption that the lasers don't become like ridiculously cheap overnight, and also that we don't get ridiculously good weed recognition overnight as well. And so until we have that, then we're sort of limited to autonomous systems, because no one's going to drag something behind a tractor at 3 or 4 kilometres an hour for days on end. And it's not such a bad thing to have it as an autonomous system either, because lasers are pretty much weatherproof. So you don't need to worry about wind or rain or whatever. You can have these things going around the clock 24/7 for months. So that's probably the lowest cost, most practical option in the short term.
So what are you working on then? Are you working on at the moment making them faster and more targeted?
So as a weed scientist, I'm just working on figuring out how well these things kill weeds. Not only looking at lasers and electrical weeding, but there's a range of other stuff. So water jet cutting, we're looking at the weed seed destroyer system, which is the blue light and the mid-wave infrared heating. Yeah, even looking at maybe inter-row mowing too at some stage. So, yeah.
What was the first one you mentioned? Water jet cutting.
Water jet cutting, yeah.
What is that?
So that's just high pressure water jets. And when you focus it at a weed plant and you cut below the growing point, it's just like a knife going through the soil. And the calculations that we've done determine that if you've got a density of 5 plants per metre squared, across a hectare, you're using less than 20 litres of water.
That's so interesting because you think in farming that water is scarcity, but you're using it to kill weeds and then putting it on your crop. Tell me, you said that your job was about figuring out how well they work. How well do the zapping technologies work in terms of efficacy?
100% control of small weeds, as a generalisation. So we can get 100% control of 3 to 4 leaf ryegrass or brassica weeds with about 4 seconds of laser treatment time. As the weeds get bigger, they get harder to kill. They require longer durations of treatment, which means they need more energy, which would potentially need a bigger laser, etc. But it's all about figuring out on that curve of energy requirement for weed control, just how much the overall cost of these things is going to be.
So you keep talking about energy, and I think that's an interesting topic. How are they powered?
So lasers just by 240 volts is what we're using at the moment for it's a DC laser system, sorry. So it's only 12 volt DC power. But it's all about the power supply. On a tractor for electrical weeding, you have a transformer. So you have a generator transformer to deliver the required amount of energy. I said they're up to 5,000 volts. So you will have a fairly high performing generator to deliver that charge. Lasers don't need anywhere near that, but they need a more of a sustained charge or a sustained amount of energy over a longer period of time at the moment.
So does that make the machinery that it's being carried on heavy? Like, are they really heavy, those generators?
Yeah, they are. So you wouldn't put that on an autonomous system at the moment for the current ones. For the low energy pulsed electrical reading systems, they would potentially go on an autonomous platform.
Okay, and when is the best time to be using the zapping technologies? Is it before sowing, in sowing, harvest time?
Whenever you see the weeds, Janine, you want to get out there and kill them.
Really? So they can work anytime?
They can potentially work anytime. Depending on what iteration, whether it's an autonomous platform or whether you're on a boom, that will have some implications about when you apply them. But yeah, if it's an autonomous system and it was a laser system, then you have it going all year round, really.
What about height, depending on the crop height?
It's not so much height, but occlusion. So as the crop shades the soil surface, you can't see it anymore. It's hard to see the weeds. So then you'd have to have a shrouding system. So if the camera that's looking for the weeds is within the shroud is pushing its way along the crop rows, the camera sees the weed, the laser targets the weed.
Do they have problems with zapping crops?
Yes. For electrical weeding, yes, there's definitely a problem with zapping crops. And so in the way that it's been used commercially, particularly in the US, they use bar systems that are above the crop they're targeting tall weeds and short crops. So, for example, in Australia, we target tall broadleaf weed species like a turnip or wild radish or something in a short lentil crop.
And what about fires? I'm just thinking about these electrical zappers. Do they cause fires?
Yeah, they arc, so they do cause fires. And so the guys that have been doing the research in Western Australia are deep herds, they've been able to start a fire or two. So that's a consideration. The fire risk is always a fire risk regardless of what you're using. So even lasers will potentially cause fires, and that's something that we haven't explored yet.
Where are they already being used, the electrical ones, and how far away are they from being in Australia?
So the heavy-duty conventional electrical weeders are being used in Europe and the US, and so there's a few companies there that they've got them commercially available. So and they're used in like row crops, tree crops. So they're weeding strips around grapevines or around trees. In row crop situations, they have little shrouded systems. So there's a positive probe and a negative wheel within the same little shroud running along into rows and crops. In the US, they are using the bar system above the short crops to target the tall weeds. In Australia, Zasso and Case New Holland brought a unit in for testing, and the guys at Deep are doing some testing.
So do you know how much they're estimated to cost?
I don't actually. No, I don't know what the cost of the unit is. Yeah.
You can't buy them yet, so I suppose that's fair to not know the cost. What about laser? Where are they being used?
Yeah, other than on the carbon robotics platform, I don't know that there are any other commercially available systems. There's a few systems that have been developed. They're still in the development stage, so they're still being proven for commercial use.
GE silos have been leading the way with their custom-built grain, pellet and fertiliser silos since 1978. Built using Australian-made steel and offering a large range of high-quality, standard and optional features, the team at GE Silos can work with you to ensure you find the right silo to suit your needs. Contact GE Silos today or visit gesilos.com.au for more information. GE Silos, the right storage solution.
What's the time estimate, do you think?
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's probably at least 2 years for use in a horticultural situation, I would say, if not more, in a large-scale production systems.
Okay, and you mentioned before the weed seed destructor, and I was reading a little bit about that before the podcast. Can you tell me, so that's different to the Terminator that just crushes the weeds, isn't it? Can you tell me the difference between the two?
Briefly, the Terminator or Harrington seed destructor or the Redicott mill systems, they're all referred to as impact mills. They have a fast spinning base plate that impacts the chaff material to kill the weed seeds that are in that material. And they're all effective. They all work really well. The weed seed destroyer is being developed as a system. It's an auger-based system and it has high intensity blue light. So blue light in the 440 nanometer wavelength, same as what it comes out of sunlight, but it's at a very high intensity, so 30 times the intensity of sunlight. As well as blue light, there is mid-wave infrared heating, so a little bit different frequency to normal convection heating. And so supposedly the combination of the heating and the blue light acts on weed seeds to make them non-viable, to kill them. And so they've got these heating units and blue light systems mounted on an auger system. And so as the chaff material passes through the auger, it gets mixed. And as it's getting mixed, the weed seeds are exposed to the heating light sufficiently to kill the weed seed.
And they're in production now?
So they are being tested in commercial scale in the US and by all accounts being found to be quite effective. I think it's maybe the third season of testing. I don't know what the timeline is to commercialisation. It could be 2 or 3 years. In Australia, I'm hopeful that they will also start the commercial scale testing in the not too distant future. We've been testing a benchtop test rig for the last 12 months. I found it to be quite effective, so we're proving that it does work on ryegrass seeds and wheat chaff. Would
they be quicker than a seed terminator, like something that just crushes it?
They don't need to be quicker. They need to be similarly quick in being able to process the chaff as the harvester's using the chaff, as producing the chaff, right? So it needs to fit within the commercial harvest system. The potential advantages are a lot less horsepower requirement, potentially a tenth of the horsepower requirement of a normal mill system. And also because it's maybe potentially a lot more freer moving of the chaff material, less blocking, better able to deal with high moisture chaff material. So green canola stems, damp chaff material shouldn't be a problem in the all systems.
That sounds really positive because that's some of the things that have been challenging, I think, with the other. What are your thoughts on mechanical weed control such as camera chippers?
Yeah, again, something that's a necessity, and particularly in fallow weed control. We developed the weed chipper for effective use. It represents also the challenges of getting things to market too. So it's a mechanical device that unfortunately we haven't found a commercial partner for yet. And we're still continuing the research on that. So we've developed a system that can work for inter-row weed control. So that broadens the opportunity for mechanical tillage-based weed control. So narrow rows, narrow row spacing crops, you can eventually target weeds with a chipping action. So
can you tell me a little bit about gametocides? Have I said that right?
Yeah, I'll give you a pass on that one again. Yeah, gametocides, as the name, I guess, indicates, they are chemicals that target gametes. And they're used in the hybrid seed industry. So when you produce hybrid crops, you want pollination from the donor male parent and reception of that pollen to the female parent, which you want to cross. Most crop species have male and female parts in flowers. And so what you do is to make sure that the female parent doesn't get self-pollinated, you apply these gametocides to the female parents to prevent them from forming viable pollen, so that the viable pollen becomes the male parent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm just wondering, how do you just apply that as a herbicide?
Yeah, so you would just apply it as a straight chemical treatment to the flowering female plant.
And how long does it take to work?
Depending on the chemical, it should work pretty much straight away. And so these chemicals can be applied at quite low doses, depending on how effective they are, or they're translocated, etc. And so they are obviously 100% effective when they're used in the hybrid seed industry. And so the thinking around that is that perhaps we can identify some chemicals that have similar activity on our weed species. So can we apply a gametocide to flowering annual ryegrass plants that knocks out pollination and prevents viable seed production, but that chemical or gametocide actually needs to be selective so it doesn't affect the crop plant. So the crop can still flower and pollinate away happily, but the ryegrass for the weed plants are selectively targeted with these gametocides to stop viable seed production.
I just want to ask you, has that been done yet? It just sounds like my questions are so simple, but it sounds like a very complicated process.
No, it hasn't been done yet, not in Australia. It's being looked at in the US.
Moving on to allelopathic weed control and biological inhibition. Can you tell me about that?
Allelopathy, it's occurring all the time. Allelochemicals are generally the chemicals that are referred to as the ones that leak out of plant roots into the soil profile. These chemicals are produced as defense mechanisms. One plant species might leak these allelochemicals into the soil to stop invasion from other plant species. There's been a lot of work done over the years investigating these chemicals. And a common known one is sorgoleone that leaks out of sorghum roots. Sorgoleone is known to inhibit plants, and it actually helps create a better growing environment for sorghum crops. So sorghum crops then have quite a strong competitive nature about them. So not only is the plants growing compete with weed plants for water, nutrients and light, but the sorgoleone chemical actually interferes with any weed growth. So this whole area of allelochemical research is to try and find chemicals that inhibit weeds, and then to think about, do we introduce this characteristic as a genetic trait into a wheat crop, for example? So it's got an automatic weed control chemical built in that it's generating, or do you just synthesize these chemicals and turn them into herbicides? So there's that sort of research is going on. And there's a little bit more to it as well, and finding these allelochemicals also have other properties as well as weed interference. Talking about sorgoleone, so it interferes with weeds. This same chemical also interferes with nitrifying bacteria. So in the soil there are these populations of bacteria, they're naturally occurring, and they automatically convert ammonia to nitrate. That process happens whenever you apply nitrogen to the soil. The nitrifying bacteria just make that process happen. The sorgoleone, an allelochemical, when it's in the soil environment, it inhibits that nitrifying process by those bacteria. And so that means that the N stays in the soil longer, available for the plants, because when it gets converted to nitrate nitrogen leaches readily from the soil profile. And so when it's in ammonia form, it doesn't leach readily from the soil. It's bound to the soil much more strongly than nitrate.
So you were talking about the allelochemicals and perhaps either genetically putting them into wheat or applying them. I think this sort of goes into another question that I had just around these different technologies. I was thinking it'd be great to just put them in the wheat, because I'm hoping that some of these technologies are actually going to cut our input costs down. So we're applying less. Not only are we hoping to just apply less herbicide, but also one that's good, less herbicides, less cost, less work, less resistance. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, it would be wonderful if these magical chemicals, that's possible. The magic word is cost. So that developing genetic traits has a cost associated with it. There's also some variability whether the trait is expressed and whether there's enough chemical to do what you want it to do in the amounts that you need in the soil. So there's always that risk that when you turn something into a genetic trait, that it's not going to work as well as you hope it would. And quite often the easiest and unfortunately, maybe sometimes the most cost-effective solution is take that chemical, synthesize it, put it in a drum and spray it out. A lot of our herbicides have come from chemicals produced by plants.
That's a really interesting point, Michael. So what about in general, in terms of these alternative weed control options? Do you feel that they might help farmers with sort of bringing down input costs?
I certainly hope so. Yeah. And I hope that not only just input costs, but also reliability of weed control. We are in a constant war with weeds who are continually adapting to whatever we like to throw at them. We just need more weed control options to diversify our attack, our weapons against weeds, so that not any one weed control option is continually under pressure for adaptation by the weeds.
I can see that's what you're really passionate about and what you've dedicated so much of your working life to. What about microjet sprayers? Can you tell me about those?
I guess we're heading back into the chemical application approaches now. So again, it's about targeting weed plants and even specific parts of weed plants with much reduced amounts of herbicides. So microjet sprayers have always been played around with in those terms to try and reduce the amount of herbicide applications specifically to lead targets. The reason why they're becoming a bit more interesting and a bit more realistic is because we have got weed recognition technologies that are developing quite well, quite rapidly, that would allow us to not just identify the weed plants, but weed plant parts. Again, looking at trying to target the growing points of these weed plants with specific micro amounts of herbicide. So we're talking about 1 to 10 microliters of chemical instead of 100 to 200 mils of a chemical. And so the systems that have been played around with in recent times in some research activity in the US are bubble jet printers. So they have the printer heads and their array of microjets, and there's about, I think, 30-something microjets in these printer head arrays. And they're, at the moment, they're used commercially for high-speed printing of labels on cardboard boxes. So these cardboard boxes flying underneath these printer heads, and they're just printing out the labels as they go along. The microjets are being activated according to what the shape of the lettering is, etc. So it's quite high-speed actuation of those individual print jets. And so the idea is that we take that printer head, we turn it into a microjet sprayer, and we start using it in crops, activating it on particular weed plant parts. So not just the whole weed, but actually just the small parts of the weeds that we need to try and target.
That is so cool, because you've really given me a really good picture. So would you say that these microjet sprayers are the next step from optical spraying? I'm imagining that you've got your big boom, you've got your optical sprayers, your optical cameras looking, and then instead of the normal jets, you've got these little microjets on the boom, and they're just targeting, putting a tiny little bit of on each plant to target the growth points. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, sort of. This is where the practicalities interfere with that vision. So when you've got small micro amounts of liquid, you can't deliver them from a standard 50 centimetre height. You have to get closer to the target, otherwise they're just going to get blown around everywhere. And again, if you've got higher speeds, you're going to interfere with the delivery of those jets for the weed plant target. So again, we're back looking at that autonomous solution to transporting these microjets over the fields with the jet spray heads below the crop canopy targeting the weed plants.
That's so exciting. I just think that's really cool. And this is why we have people like you, Michael, doing the research so that these things will happen. I can just sort of think, oh, that'd be really good. And you can work out how it's going to work. No pressure. That's
Yeah, so the real driver for these reduced amounts of chemical is that it opens up the door to a whole new chemical cupboard, essentially. So there's all sorts of chemicals that are on shelves in herbicide companies all over the world that haven't been used to date because they're too expensive. They might be highly effective, but they're too expensive to deliver to weeds. So when you start reducing the amount of chemical that you use by a factor of 1,000 or even 1,000,000 times the amount, then it does allow you to use these much more expensive chemicals more economically.
We're talking a little bit about optical spray technology and how there's technology now that's recognising different weeds. Is there a universal system being developed so that everyone can have access to the weed pictures?
So there's an international weed recognition consortium who are trying to develop that global opportunity, a large-scale database with all the annotated weed images contained there that people can source. It's supposedly going to be an open source repository for all these weeds that people can then take to develop their own weed recognition algorithms. There's certainly been a lot of weed image data collection, and there's been some annotation, but it's a bit of a slow burn at the moment.
What are you most excited about in this space? What technology?
Most excited about, probably for the wrong reasons, that's lasers, because they are awesome to use. There's just so much energy just gets blasted into these weed plants in such an intense short period of time. It's quite satisfying to burn these weeds to a crisp with a big laser.
I bet it is. You've been looking at killing them for so long and you're just burning them. I can imagine that would be super satisfying. What would your advice be, Michael, to farmers controlling weeds today?
So today, right at this very moment, I would say just get it right with what you've got available and make sure you keep getting it right. No shortcuts, because the alternatives are coming, but they're coming slowly. So you're not going to get a whole suite of these things in the next 5 years. And so you have to keep looking after what you've got now and hope that you can still be using it in 5 years' time.
And why are you so passionate about weeds and these alternative options?
I guess it's because when I did start working with herbicide resistance and talking to growers, I just saw how much pain it was causing. As a scientist, you get in your own little world and you play around with herbicide. This one works, that one doesn't work, that sort of works. And then when you start talking to growers about these options that you thought you might have, and they would say, that doesn't work because, this one doesn't work because, and then you say, well, what have you got? And they'd say, not a lot. And then seeing through the years where herbicide resistance really kicked in, there was just a lot of growers that went out of business. And that's horrible.
I can see the passion in your face, Michael, and I can tell that's why you've become a researcher, obviously, because you want to make a difference. Was there anything else that you wanted to add that you thought our listeners might be interested in this space?
I guess the thing is patience and don't give up hope. And there are other things that will come through, maybe in the short term, and they might seem ridiculous, like electrical weeding might seem ridiculous to a lot of people, but there's still options. They can still get you out of the bind, but probably the fact that whatever comes through is not going to be as effective as what you've already got in terms of being a highly effective herbicide. Yeah, that's where you need to be patient and understanding.
BCG drives the prosperity of Australian farmers, communities and landscapes through applied research, innovation and events. To find out more about what we're up to, our team and events near you, visit bcg.org.au.